Selected parts from the book Lone Fox Dancing, Autobiography by Ruskin Bond, Part 3. We had at least 3 homes in Jamnagar. First, there was a rambling old colonial mansion whose roof leaked every time it rained. After this, or maybe before, a wing of the old palace, which looked like a ruin from the outside but was cool and comfortable inside, though we had to share it with bats and bandicoots. Finally, we moved to the tennis bungalow, a converted sports complex which was bright and airy and where we stayed the longest. Jamnagar was where my habit of walking really began because it was full of spacious palaces, lawns, and gardens. By the time I was 4, I was exploring much of this territory on my own. Although I was afraid of aeroplanes and sailing ships, I was not troubled by birds, beasts, or reptiles. The old walls around the palace grounds were infested with snakes of various descriptions, and I saw them often enough on the lawns or the driveway. Envious of their swift gliding movements, I tried crawling about on my belly at home, but I was not much good at it. Curious though I was, I knew instinctively that if I did not bother them or get in their way, the snakes would keep away and allow me to pass. They did not send me into a panic as they did Aya, who would scream, "Samp, samp," and dash into the house, urging my father or the cook to come out and vanquish the reptile. The snakes seldom entered the house as they had to climb a flight of steps in order to do so, and most snakes prefer not to exert themselves unduly. Unless, of course, there is a frog or a fat rat in the offing, and then they can move with great speed in order to snap up their breakfast or dinner. My father's schoolroom and the tennis bungalow were located in the grounds of the old palace, which was largely uninhabited and full of turrets, stairways, and mysterious dark passages that I loved to explore. I climbed right to the top of the main tower one afternoon and discovered a room with glass windows going right round it, and each square pane stained with a different color. It became my favorite place for days, and I would climb up to look through different panes of glass at a red or yellow or rose pink or indigo or parrot green world. The room was always empty, and it stayed in my memory as a lonely and magical place. I never saw a palace gardener, but if there was one, he must have believed in letting nature take its course. In the old palace grounds, we were surrounded by a veritable jungle of a garden. Marigolds and cosmos grew rampant in the tall grass between shady trees. An old disused well was the home of countless pigeons, and their soft cooing by day contrasting with the shrill cries of the brain fever bird at night. Just beyond the palace grounds was the state farm. It had ducks and geese, hens and roosters. My favorite birds were the turkeys, bred mainly for Christmas and New Year banquets, for it was only the Europeans in the state who really appreciated turkey meat. Gobble, gobble, gobble went the turkeys whenever I passed them. I liked their colorful plumage. They were always waiting to be fed. The ducks and geese roamed all over the place, but the turkeys had a pen to themselves. A middle aged Welsh couple, Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, ran the farm for His Highness the Jam Sahib. They seemed quite happy spending time with each other and the birds and animals, with books and magazines providing some variety. There would be stacks of Punch, Country Life, and Picture Post lying about on their veranda. My reading skills were still rather limited, but I liked going through them for their pictures and cartoons. The lurid covers of Edgar Wallace mysteries also attracted me, but it would be a few years before I became an addict of mysteries and detective fiction. I possessed only two books during those Jamnagar years, a big book of nursery rhymes and a battered edition of Alice in Wonderland. It was by reading Alice with help from my father that I learned to read, and my favorite characters were the Mad Hatter, the March Hare, the Dormouse, Poor Bill the Lizard, the Cheshire Cat, and the philosophical caterpillar smoking his hookah. I could not really identify with Alice, who seemed a superior sort of person. All this reading happened outside the classroom because I was not enrolled in a school. Among the pupils were the four Jamnagar princesses Manha, Jhanak, Ratna, and Hati. I would spend a lot of time standing in front of their desks and watch them pore over their readers, with the result that I developed the skill of reading things upside down. The two eldest princesses, who must have been 9 or 10, except that I was not sure that they were girls. They were always dressed in bandagala jackets and trousers and kept their hair quite short. When my father told me they were girls, not boys, I found it all a bit confusing. Hattie, the youngest princess, was closer to me in age, and she was my playmate in that rather informal schoolroom. The little prince, the heir to the throne, not yet in school, sometimes came over to the bungalow to play with me. The sweet natured son of the Jam Sahib's secretary, a Bengali gentleman with a very plummy accent, was another playmate. And there was my sister Ellen, 2 years younger to me, whom I would push around the garden on a tricycle. She had been born with some difficulty and had suffered a forceps injury to the brain, which was to affect her development and result in her being almost an invalid for life. These companions and many others are still familiar faces in my father's photographs. How beautiful we are as small children, innocent, untouched by corruption, our faces smooth and unlined, nothing to worry about except baths and haircuts and running out of cream biscuits. My biggest worry was the monthly haircut. I hated it. When the barber appeared on the veranda steps, I would run for cover and Aya would have to chase me around the house until I was trapped by my mother, wrapped up in a bedsheet and deposited in a high chair, still struggling and kicking. The barber was a mad looking fellow who came armed with an unusually large pair of scissors. My tantrums would only make him nervous, and I would end up looking like one of the mop haired urchins in a dandy or Beno comic. I had a number of bad habits, which included sucking my thumb. Nothing could cure me of this habit, with the result that by the time I was 5 or 6, I had buck teeth. Over the years, the teeth have settled down a little, but I have never quite recovered from those early haircuts, and my hair is apt to stand on end after a nap or a walk or any public appearance. Just recently, I have noticed a number of young men going about with mobs of healthy hair standing on end. So, it appears I am finally in fashion. Sometimes, after a particularly traumatic encounter with the barber's scissors, my father would take me to the small cinema in town where English language films were shown on special occasions. One of them, which I remember vividly, was Tarzan the Ape Man. Tarzan, champion swimmer Johnny Weissmuller, dressed in a flapping miniskirt, spoke very little, but he dived off high cliffs into big rivers and swung beautifully from one tree to another with the help of conveniently placed vines and creepers. Back home, I tried swinging from my mother's curtains only to tear two of them to shreds. I was made to stitch them together again, something I did with considerable help from my ever loving Aya. And here I must pause to tell you a little more about Aya, my guardian, friend, and beloved, all rolled into one and wrapped up in a white sari. My mother, young in years and younger at heart, was often always attending the lunch and tea get togethers that the ladies of the royal household liked to organize, or she would accompany the younger royals on picnics and excursions. My father spent more time with me, but he would be at work through much of the day. I would be left in the care of the servants, all but the ayah provided by the Jamnagar state. I had no objection to the arrangement because the servants indulged me, most of all ayah. She was probably from one of the fishing communities of Kathiawar or from the poorer Muslim families from the north of India who worked in Christian and Anglo Indian households. She must have been in her 30s and was unusually large and broad limbed for an Indian woman and shaped like a papaya. I was told she had a family of her own, but I never saw them and she never spoke of them. She was the one I spent the most time with at home. She stayed all day washing my clothes, giving me a bath, and telling me stories in Hindustani about jinns and fairies, and the snake transformed into a handsome prince by the loving touch of a beautiful princess. Aya had large round hands and I liked being soaped and scrubbed by her. She could also use those hands very effectively to deliver a few resounding slaps because I really was a little devil. But her anger vanished as quickly as it came when she saw me break into tears. And then she would break down herself. My mother was not a physically demonstrative person. The occasional peck on the cheek was enough emotion for her. Aya taught me many things. One of these was the eating of corn. I did not care for the taste, somewhat bitter because of the betel nut and lime, but I was fascinated by the red juice which Aya would spit with great accuracy in different corners of the overgrown garden. When my parents were out, she would make me a miniature pond. I think she added a little sugar in it, and I would chew the pond and sit in the kitchen gossiping with her and the cook. Before my parents came home, Aya would rinse my mouth with warm water, and with her rough fingers she would scrub my teeth clean. If I swallowed an orange seed, Aya would say an orange tree would grow inside me. Being an imaginative child, this rather worried me because orange trees, I was told, had thorns on them. I did not want to worry my parents unduly, so I took my problem to Mr. Jenkin, who looked serious, thought about it for a few moments, then said, "Don't worry, it will only be a small tree." Still worried, I consulted Osman, who laughed and said, "Your ayah is just a Gapuri. Don't listen to her." "What is a Gapuri?" asked him. "One who makes up stories and exaggerates. Go and tell her you have swallowed a bean." I did, and she said, "Oh, Baba, now we will have a beanstalk growing inside you, and there will be a giant living in it?" I asked her. She burst into laughter, seeing I had caught her out. Osman says you are a Gapuri, I told her. And she and Osman had a terrible fight. She chased him around the house and forgave him only when he said he meant she was a pari, a fairy, not a Gapuri. Still, I think I learned something about telling stories from Aya as I did from Osman, although I had no idea that I would become a Gapuri of sorts one day.